Hello, folks. Welcome. I see Jane is getting on. Hey, Jane. Welcome.
Hi, Simon. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you great. And I know David is getting on shortly. Thanks for taking the time today.
Yeah, of course. Thanks so much for having us.
And I think we've got a good crew logging in today. Everybody, we'll begin in just a minute. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll get going in just a second. Jane, are you at the office or are you still at home?
I'm still at home. I am actually like in my parents' house in the great state of New Hampshire, but we'll be in DC next week. So
But I know folks are moving in now this month. There's a big return of people coming into the office. We'll wait another minute or so for David and Jane. If I'll let you kick it off if he isn't here, and we'll just get going.
He just messaged me and he's on his way. So.
Okay. And folks, I got a question already. This will be recorded. It will be available on our website this afternoon. And just to go over format as we wait for David is that we will be, David and Jane will be talking for 15 to 20 minutes, and then I'll ask a couple questions, and then we'll open it up to Q&A, and we'll be wrapping up around 1:40, 1:45. Here is David. Hey, David, welcome. We have to unmute you, David. There we go. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having us into your living room.
It is my living room. It's a long story. I'm home today. One of my kids is sick, which is, as you know, David, is part of what our life is all about. And also our air conditioning broke upstairs, so I'm not in my normal office and I'm improvising in our living room. So anyway, thank you both for being here. Let me start and get going because we try to start and end on time here at NDN. I'm Simon Rosenberg from NDN. This is our almost every Tuesday at 1 o'clock series of looking into the most important issues in American politics. We're grateful for all of you being here with us today. It's a special event. We've got two friends from the White House who are going to be talking about a set of issues near and dear to our heart about climate and clean energy and the big, bold agenda the president has proposed and is promoting around the desperate need for us to move into a cleaner energy future. And we have with us David Kieve, who's part of the Council on Environmental Quality. He runs the public engagement portion of the Council on Environmental Quality, which is the guy who's responsible for talking to the public and making sure that they know what the president's doing. And also we have Jane Flegal, who's works on emissions from Council on Environmental Quality. These are all new titles and things that we're all learning, right, in this administration. But we're really grateful, the two of you, for being here. The format is you're going to speak for 15 to 20 minutes. I'll be asking a few questions. We'll have a moderated Q&A. We'll go to about 1:40, 1:45. And this recording will be available on the website later this afternoon. So David, I know that I'm going to kick it off to you. David, quick background, right? You have their bios, but David was a climate advisor during the campaign, is helping lead the effort now in the White House. And David, I turn it to you. I mean, you guys have taken some big swings in the infrastructure plan. You've got more things planned. How's it going? Give us your update.
It's going really well, Simon. First of all, thank you to you personally and to the New Democratic Network for having us this afternoon. We're honored and happy to be here. I'm going to try to be quick so that I can turn the floor over as quickly as I can to my friend and colleague, Jane Flegal, who's way smarter than I am and who can talk about at really sort of a more granular level some of the things that we're really excited about and some of the opportunities that we have to innovate within the president's plans on climate. But having been around both the campaign and then the transition and now the government for a little bit. I was there at the start, and I could talk about some of the origins of the president's plans and some of the thinking that informed it, and share a little bit on a sort of a big picture level of why we're so excited about what we've got going on. So with that, let me just sort of quickly introduce myself. Simon, you did a more than adequate job, but I find in my job that it's useful to hear people explain what they do in their own terms, because you hear why they're excited about it. I serve, as Simon mentioned, as the Director of Public Engagement at the White House Council on Environmental Quality. I also sit informally at the White House Office of Public Engagement. And that's important because I think that sends a signal that this is a White House that views the community of people who care deeply about addressing the climate crisis and want to see immediate action taken to combat the climate crisis as a constituency. And it's fun because it means that I get to engage with them. I also, prior to this, served on the transition, and before that, helped lead climate engagement for the campaign, where I had the distinction of being literally the only person on a $1 billion campaign whose job it was to exclusively focus on climate. So it was a big responsibility and had a lot of help from a lot of folks pitching in. And we had a sort of lean policy staff, which we were able to do in part because of President Biden's long history in public service and the goodwill that he earned from former staffers. So there were folks all across Washington and across the country who had worked for the president in some capacity or another, who were happy to roll up their sleeves and contribute to his plans and help inform our thinking. And now I have the distinction and honor of getting a chance to serve alongside many of them in government for the first time ever. So we came a long way, and we came from sort of a neat place. Tomorrow is an interesting anniversary that'll be meaningless to most of the folks watching this Zoom and to anyone who watches it online after the fact, but it means something to me. Tomorrow marks 1 year since the president laid out his Build Back Better agenda, the clean energy pillar of it. He stood before the American people and he said, you know, the climate crisis is an existential threat facing our planet, but it also presents an enormous opportunity for us because it gives us a chance to create good paying jobs in clean energy with an opportunity to join a union. And in the president's thinking, and he's since articulated this over and over and over again, there is no question that the jobs of the future are going to be in clean energy. The open question is whether they're sited here in America and conform to American labor standards and give folks an opportunity to feed their families off them, or if they're sited somewhere else, most likely China or perhaps India or someplace else. So a big part of our challenge in terms of crafting our plan and trying to implement and execute it is how are we best able to lay the groundwork for job creation and job growth so that America is the global leader in tackling the climate crisis. And that's something that we've been thinking about consistently and something that we've been talking about now for 364 days. And tomorrow it'll be I guess today's the 365th day. And tomorrow will be the 366th. So I know what the president's for. You guys know what the president's for because he's been saying it over and over and over again over the course of the last year, and he's been remarkably consistent about it. Another thing that strikes me as being a real honor and a privilege is that I have the distinction of working for a president who has leaned in on climate in a way that we have never, ever seen a president lean in on climate before. He's used every key moment of his presidency to highlight the urgency of the climate crisis and lift it up. It was a central focus of his inaugural address. It was a central focus of his first address to a joint session of Congress, something that in year 2, 3, and more of his presidency will be referred to as the State of the Union, but is not historically in the first year. It was a central focus of his first overseas trip where he convened NATO and the G7 and restored American leadership throughout the world on climate. So at big moment after big moment, including the night that he won the presidency and the night that he accepted the Democratic nomination, he's placed the climate crisis at the absolute center of what he's done. So we think he's earned a fair amount of goodwill and faith and trust that he means what he says when he says we need to tackle the climate crisis and we're going to do it. Going back, a year now to ancient history, to his plan, one of the things that really sort of struck me and struck a bunch of us, we had this joke when we were on the campaign that if Joe Biden says that he's going to do something, it immediately becomes sort of middle of the road and is not particularly ambitious or progressive. He leaned in with really ambitious, really strong plans. And particularly in the context of the primary race, which I was also a part of, the collective response was, if Joe Biden's for it, it's not particularly ambitious. Now that he's president and now that we're governing, what was once thought to be a little bit of a liability for us because we didn't get the credit for things that we deserved, now feels to a lot of us like Joe Biden's superpower. He is proposing things that will transform our economy, transform our world, transform our climate in really meaningful ways, but he's presenting it in a way that is reasonable and approachable to the American people, that relates to folks in a way that they understand how he's going to do what he intends to do and how it will impact their lives in a meaningful and measurable way, and presents it in a way that is sensible and gets a great deal of buy-in. And then in terms of working with key stakeholders and constituencies, his approach is to bring along as many people as he possibly can. So we're really, really proud of the fact that there has never been labor buy-in for a climate plan as ambitious as the one that the president has crafted. And one of the things that we heard over and over again from folks like President Lonnie Stevenson from the IBEW is, look, I represent close to 750,000 people, men and women. Every single one of them is or was an energy worker. Very few of them are in clean energy at present, but I'm supporting the president's plan because that's where the jobs of the future are. And every single energy worker at some point in the future of this country is going to be in clean energy. So I'm almost at time and I want to leave lots of space for Jane, but let me just give a quick sort of legislative update with a little bit more of our view of the world as it currently stands. The president said a couple of things really clearly. I've already talked about how seriously he takes the climate crisis. So I don't need to dig in further on that. But he's also said that he believes strongly that we ought to get a bipartisan deal done on infrastructure and that he's personally invested in that. Let's be clear about that bill. It's an infrastructure package. It's not a climate package, but it does some really ambitious, aggressive things on climate and particularly on environmental justice. If I had to pick one thing within the plan that I'm most excited about, it's that we think we can get every single inch of lead pipe in our drinking water out of our drinking water through the investment in about, I think, $56 billion to update our drinking water through the bipartisan infrastructure framework. It also makes historic investments in electric charging for vehicles to help to spur us forward. But we know that while those investments are historic, they're not sufficient. And what the president has said over and over again is that in order to meet this moment, we're going to need to be really big and really bold. And if, when his presidency is over, he goes to sleep and says, he's trying to lay down after he says his prayers at night and says, I'm worried that I might have done too much to combat the challenges that were facing us, he'll sleep just fine. In these moments that we're facing today, he thinks the worst thing you could do is not do enough to act, and he's committed to rolling up his sleeves and doing everything that he can to combat this climate crisis. So what we saw from him last week was a little bit of a reframing in a way that was really familiar to a lot of us who had been around. He recommitted to the elements of the American Families Plan that he's been out pushing for quite some time, and recommitted to address the climate crisis in core ways, including by creating a clean electricity standard, by promoting huge tax credits, which are going to really incentivize the way that we invest in a clean energy future, and by investing in a civilian conservation corps. He reframed all of those things in a way that we've been talking about now for a year as this is our plan to build back better. So with that, I'll stop rambling because I think I'm in about 10 minutes, and I'll turn the floor over to my friend Jane. Jane, I'm sorry for keeping you waiting, and audience, I'm sorry for keeping you all waiting to hear from Dr. Flegal.
Thanks, David. He always mentions to say Dr. Flegal, which is both embarrassing and very thoughtful. As David said, I'm Jane Flegal, and I think I am the first ever Senior Director for Industrial Emissions at the Council on Environmental Quality in the White House, which I think and I hope reflects the Biden-Harris administration's serious commitment to addressing the set of issues that lie at the intersection of innovation, industrial competitiveness and job creation, public health, and climate. One of the things that I think is really remarkable about how this administration is approaching climate action is that the president really understands that there's not a single easy panacea for addressing the climate challenge. Climate is an incredibly complicated problem implicating a wide range of diverse sectors and actors. And it's for that reason that we're looking at each sector of the economy in a granular way to ensure that as we act on the climate challenge, we do so in a way that generates economic prosperity, creates good paying jobs in real places, and protects public health and the environment. This means that we're looking at it in a holistic way at addressing emissions, not just in the power sector or even in the transportation sector, which has been the big focus of climate advocacy for a long time, but in the industrial sector, where investments in innovation are going to be really central to achieving our goals. So I'll just say a few words on the nature of the industrial decarbonization problem and what we're doing about it. First, I think it's worth taking a moment to reflect on what we mean when we say industry. Industry encompasses manufacturing, construction, waste processing. So the industrial sector, and maybe it's because it's a sector I'm working on most closely, but it's really amazing. It produces all of the physical stuff that underpins modern life. And we know that a strong and resilient manufacturing and industrial sector is critical to a healthy economy that provides high quality jobs and, importantly, pathways to the middle class. And yet, we've really underinvested in domestic manufacturing for years, especially relative to our global competitors. And if this last year has taught us anything, it's that the security and resilience of our supply chains is absolutely essential. To remain strong economically, the US has to rebuild its manufacturing sector. And importantly, we now know that making better products through investing in innovation in the industrial sector, like producing clean cement and clean steel, is extremely popular nationwide. The good news is that the clean energy transition creates a really important opportunity to reinvest and ensure that we make many of the products that underpin the clean energy economy here, and in a way that creates economic opportunity for real communities while cleaning up the air and water. The energy transition, which is already well underway, is going to require a lot of stuff in a way that I'm not sure many people beyond the president often recognize. Offshore wind, electric vehicles, clean buildings, all of these things are made of materials like steel and cement. As we build the clean and resilient infrastructure of the future, we have an opportunity to build it with clean American-made products that we innovate here. And that way, the energy transition is a huge opportunity to revitalize manufacturing, create good-paying union jobs, and reduce pollution. That said, while there's a lot of opportunity in revitalizing and cleaning up the manufacturing sector at the moment, and again, I think this is often underappreciated by everyone but the president, industry is a major contributor to climate pollution and to other kinds of pollution as well. In fact, industry is on track to be the biggest emitting sector in the United States within the decade. Direct industrial emissions from factories account for about a quarter of all greenhouse gases. And if you add the emissions from generating electricity used by those facilities, industrial emissions account for a third of all greenhouse gas emissions globally. And importantly, those emissions are rising at about twice the rate of overall greenhouse gas emissions. At the same time, industrial facilities are a leading source of other kinds of local air pollution and toxic materials that enter our environment. And those local impacts of industrial activity tend to fall disproportionately on vulnerable communities. So our clean manufacturing strategies that we're using in the Biden administration can and should address legacy and ongoing pollution from industrial activities and occur in the context of a robust and effective regulatory regime for conventional pollutants. So what are we doing about all of this? The Biden administration is, in this area, like elsewhere, truly taking a whole of government approach to addressing industrial emissions and domestic manufacturing. And I can say that because I am now very much in the center of that work. That means investing in enabling infrastructure for industrial decarbonization, like electricity transmission and carbon dioxide sequestration, and boosting clean power. Without clean electrons that can move to factories, industrial electrification, which is one strategy for decarbonizing industry, won't yield the societal benefits we want to see. But it also means supporting research and development and the demonstration of industrial decarbonization technologies, everything from carbon capture, utilization, and sequestration to clean hydrogen. And we're pursuing all of those actions while ensuring that overburdened communities are protected from increases in cumulative pollution. Importantly, the president also recognizes that no clean manufacturing strategy is going to succeed without investing in diverse and unionized workforces. That's why the administration is bolstering training programs, particularly at minority-serving institutions, investing in regional manufacturing, and increasing access to capital for domestic manufacturers. But we know that supply-side investments in industrial decarbonization alone won't yield the benefits we seek. We have to ensure that there's strong early demand for low-carbon materials and products coming out of factories. One important tool here is public procurement, which we can use to create markets for low-carbon products. Some of this work is already being pursued with existing programs and authorities, including, importantly, I think, authorizations in the Energy Act of 2020, which passed on a bipartisan basis at the end of last year. Industrial decarbonization is an area where we've actually seen folks really come together to move the ball forward, which is very exciting. But importantly, that's just the tip of the iceberg. The American Jobs Plan would fundamentally transform our ability to tackle these issues head on. The Jobs Plan includes historic investments to accelerate industrial decarbonization while investing in a more competitive and resilient domestic manufacturing base. This includes everything from $35 billion in climate innovation, leveraging federal procurement of clean energy and lower zero carbon products, building out the infrastructure that can enable industrial decarbonization, like transmission and carbon dioxide sequestration opportunities, supporting clean and renewable electricity, including through an energy efficiency and clean electricity standard, which will ensure that as we electrify the industrial sector, we're doing so with clean electrons. Funding for CCUS, carbon capture, utilization, and sequestration, and clean hydrogen demonstration projects, as well as tax credits for industrial decarbonization technologies, among many, many other things. So the bottom line is that if you care about innovation, clean manufacturing, and the climate crisis, you should be thrilled about the American Jobs Plan. We're really excited about the work we and others, including many of you here today, continue to do to support and elevate the need for an integrated manufacturing and climate strategy. And what's exciting for me is that the administration really continues to believe that a smart and effective domestic manufacturing strategy is necessarily a climate strategy and vice versa. So we look forward to working with all of you here today as we move the ball forward. And Simon, I'm happy to turn things back to you for a discussion.
Thanks, Jane. Thanks, David. And I just want to also note that in addition to everything else that happened in the infrastructure framework, that we got Republicans on the record supporting ambitious climate legislation for the first time. It may not be everything that we want, but part of, I think, Joe Biden's strategy is that we've got to try to get the Republican Party as much as possible to become partners in solving the big problems facing the country and not just always on the outside, fighting everything we're doing. And I think that I think the administration deserves incredible credit and has not gotten, frankly, enough credit for having gotten the Republicans to sign on for the first time, right, in something meaningful, hundreds of billions of dollars that will be a piece of the strategy. It's by no means the whole strategy, as you went through, Jane and David, but I think that's something that I will be honest with you, when I read the details of the framework, I was astonished the Republicans had signed on to any of this, given their resistance to signing on to any piece of it, right, weeks earlier. And it shows that there really is that developing this broad constituency we're going to need to not just pass legislation, but carry it through over the next 10 to 20 years this was an important first step, and hats off to you and the whole team for that. Let's go to questions. What I'd like to do, as all of you know, we're all Zoom warriors now. There are two ways to ask questions. One is you can type into the Q&A box. You also can raise your hand for those who want to jump right in and have their voice heard in the conversation. I will remind everybody this is being recorded. And so we want to make sure that you're aware of that before we jump in. David, I think there was an early question in the Q&A box that you wanted to take on. I'll turn it to you.
Sure, and hat tip to Emily Martin for being the first one in line for questions. I'll just read it, I think. It says, I understand the desire to push through a bipartisan infrastructure bill that appeases everyone, but why is Biden compromising away our futures by neglecting to focus on climate in the American Jobs Plan? That's a question that we've gotten a few times and that we're not afraid to sort of do our best to answer. I sort of touched on this at the very end of our comments, of my comments earlier, but let me just maybe put a little bit finer point on it. The president believes two things. One is he badly wants to see a bipartisan deal on infrastructure pass. He thinks it's good for the country. It's good for our competitiveness. It's good for our government to show that Democrats and Republicans can roll up their sleeves and work together. And he's proud of the climate elements within it. He also does not believe that it is sufficient to address the climate crisis. So I think part of what we struggle with at the White House with questions like that is that they're sort of undergirded by a premise that the bipartisan infrastructure deal is all we're going to get. And what we're here to say to you and to reassure everyone on is that the president is very committed to addressing the climate crisis. He, again, last week laid out exactly how he intends to do that. It's consistent with what he's been talking about for a year now. But the three cornerstones of that effort are a clean electricity standard, huge investments in tax credits to help change the incentivize changes to the way we live and consume energy in this country so that it transitions to clean energy, and the creation of a civilian climate corps. And the reason why there was so much excitement within the White House when the bipartisan infrastructure framework was announced, and why that excitement still exists today, is it is our widely held view that a bipartisan deal on infrastructure is highly net positive towards the likelihood that we get climate change addressed in a real and meaningful way, which we understand needs to happen via reconciliation. So that's our answer. I understand that there's some concern out there because there's a lot of bills and a lot of sort of Washington talk. But the president has said over and over again what he's for, and we're out there pushing for it every single day.
Can I just make one comment on that? My organization is from sort of the centrist New Democrat moderate wing. I don't know if these words really mean anything anymore, but and one of the reasons I really wanted to host this is that I wanted to make sure that people were aware that at least in the House, the dynamics of the politics on these issues are different than they are in the Senate. The moderate centrists are very pro-climate. The New Democrat coalition in the House has been very aggressive at putting out very ambitious climate bills and climate proposals. And I think that, there's going to be clearer sailing for this component of the reconciliation bill in the House than there may be with Joe Manchin, who seems, by the way, let's just be very clear. I mean, Manchin looks like he's really playing ball on the reconciliation front. I mean, certainly even with his comments today, what he was talking about was pay-fors as opposed to what was in it. And if that's where he's going to focus, that's a great place to focus, because it means he's not trying to kill any of the elements of what's on, is going to be in the ultimate reconciliation package. And so I'm very optimistic. I just want to say this, that part of the reason we're hosting this is that I'm very optimistic that there is broad momentum throughout the entire Democratic caucus for something very, very ambitious in reconciliation around climate. And we just wanted to sort of use this as an exclamation point to talk to folks in our family about the commitment of the whole caucus, I think, towards this agenda. Let me call on Greg. Greg, I'm going to pull you in here for the next question. David and Jane, this is a good friend of ours, Greg Rock, who is the executive director of an organization called Clean and Prosperous America, based in Seattle, Washington. Greg, I think you're unmuted.
Thanks so much, Jane and David, for this presentation. I actually similarly was going to ask a bit about the clean electricity standard and how it was going to parallel in this two-track process and how it gets prioritized within the reconciliation bill. But I'll pivot to another question that is on my mind. The youth that we worked with, and we do a lot of Clean and Prosperous America to motivate youth to turn out and vote. And our research and our engagement with them really found them supportive of environmental regulations and very concerned also about environmental justice. And so I think your industrial decarbonization is a really interesting nexus of that, where you have those point source emissions that are causing so much damage to at-risk communities, as well as the major greenhouse gas pollutants. Are you imagining a pathway for like an industrial emission standard? Obviously, there's a lot of political challenges with some of the wealthiest lobbyists and everything else being involved in the industrial sector. But I'm curious kind of what you envision as possible in that arena, because I do think it would be very popular amongst the youth of America.
Thanks, Greg. It's a great question. Yeah, the industrial sector is complicated. You know, these are energy intensive, trade exposed commodities. But as I mentioned, one of the things that I'm so excited about in terms of working on the sector is that the issues are not just about climate pollution, which is obviously sort of one of our central challenges, but about local air pollution to communities around these facilities. And as elsewhere, the president's agenda, we don't think that a fulsome climate strategy can or should move forward without addressing this issue of kind of co-pollutants and how we build a cleaner economy across the board moving forward. And so that's as true in the industrial sector as it is elsewhere. That said, we recognize that we have made a tremendous amount of progress in terms of the cost of clean energy technologies in the power and transportation sectors, and the industrial sector is just a little further behind. And so I think what's really critical here again is to look at a strategy for the sector that's holistic, that includes not just regulation of conventional pollutants, which has to be, as I said, kind of the backdrop for everything we do, but also to compete with other nations who are making very significant investments in things like clean steel, clean cement, clean hydrogen, carbon capture. You know, we don't want to fall behind when it comes to the competition for the clean energy industries of the future. And so I really think about kind of a multi-pronged approach for investing in the innovation and technologies we know we're going to need to decarbonize these sectors, while also making sure that that occurs in the context of a strong regulatory regime that protects public health. David, you should feel free to add or amend anything that I said there.
Hey, let me read the next question. Jumping to somebody from industry. Jane, this is really for you, I think, and then David, you can respond. Hi, this is Mona Sheath, Senior Director of Federal Government Relations in Schneider Electric. What programs, proposals do you see in the industrial sector around decarbonization from a regulatory perspective, coming particularly in reconciliation?
I think this is really related to Greg's question in some respects, and I think I would just sort of underscore the point I just made, which is, we will continue to use the whole host of tools that we have as an administration to drive these industries toward a cleaner future while maintaining their competitiveness in a global context, and that is something that's really critical to the long-term political and substantive success of our climate strategy. So again, I think that will involve a combination of investments and regulations to move the ball forward.
Okay, here's a fun question from Bart. Thanks Bart for coming on. Will the credits for EV cars be increased and extended? And what specifically is happening on charging stations? And I want to echo that's really important because I own a non-Tesla electric car and a Tesla electric car. And one of the differences, we are astonished now having bought a new Tesla. The charging infrastructure for Teslas is so qualitatively different than it is for non-Tesla electric cars. So as an owner of a non-Tesla electric car, I'm particularly interested in the answer to this question too.
Excellent. Well, you're ahead of me and my family, Simon. I'm a guinea pig for the tax credits. I had historically, throughout my life, I had bought relatively lightly used and in some cases heavily used cars. And a couple of years ago when I was in the market for a new car, I had incentive to buy a hybrid minivan, a Chrysler Pacifica minivan, because it was eligible for a $7,500 tax credit, which was literally more than the difference between the hybrid model and the regular new model, and was the difference in my buying an electric car or hybrid versus a car that ran on a traditional internal combustion engine. So I have lived experience with the positive impact of tax credits Tax credits are absolutely central to the president's plan. It's one of the things that he is pushing for most strongly within the reconciliation package. And we're also proud of the historic investments to the tune of, I think, $7.5 billion in electric vehicle charging. That's part of the bipartisan infrastructure framework. But it doesn't just end there. There's a lot more money in terms of investment in changing how we go about our transportation, investment in ports, investment in traditional infrastructure, roads and bridges themselves, and all sorts of things, electric buses, all sorts of things across the board that are going to change the way that we get around and really pull as hard as we can on those levers that are going to incentivize folks getting in electric cars. And Simon, you should talk to this as the proud owner of not one, but two. But one of the things that we hear from senior voices within this administration, and Secretary Kerry has been particularly strong on this point, is, listen, electric cars just perform better. When you are in them, and the American people see that they're reliable and see that you can get where you were trying to get and won't run out of batteries, they're going to want to be in them. And that's certainly been true with my hybrid, which is dinky by comparison to what you're pushing around, Simon. When it runs out of its 30 miles in town on electric, the shift over to gas is noticeable. The car is louder and it performs worse. And I wish that it had more juice in it. So that's probably a little bit of a meandering answer, but I hope I addressed the question.
I think I will just say that I think this electric car stuff is very, for many non-activists, right? This is the front lip of a lot of this discussion. And and I own a Chevy Bolt. My other car is a Chevy Bolt, which is from 2019. And it's an amazing car. And I agree with you. The services, they need far less servicing, right? They're far cheaper to maintain than traditional, internal combustion engine cars. And they do ride better. And you also get much more space because the engines are much smaller. The cars are actually far roomier in many of them for regular consumers. I think people are going to be shocked. It is an upgrade, I think, from old cars, so to speak. And so for many, it will be for many people. Let me
don't forget the image of President Biden driving away in his very fast electric F-150 that he test drove. So there's an electric car for everyone.
That was an amazing moment. And hats off to Ford for really leading into this whole effort. I think I want to try to get to a question that hasn't been sort of asked in part. Susan asked an interesting question, which is timeline, right? How long does it take for all of this stuff to happen? Not legislatively, but in the real world, right? These investments you're making, is this 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years? What's the time horizon? And Jane, particularly for some of the things that you were talking about.
David should jump in here, but one of the things that's important about the sectoral approach we're taking, I think, is that it helps to reveal and elucidate where we need a little bit more time to get the technologies that we need at scale and at cost as quickly as possible. So in the industrial sector, things like using clean hydrogen to produce steel, using carbon capture and utilization at cement facilities where 60% of the emissions that are released from producing cement come from a chemical reaction, not from the use of energy. So those technologies, that we are going to invest, presuming that we're able to pass the American Jobs Plan, which we're very confident we will, this will be an incredible moment for us to invest in the technologies that we'll need down the road for the sectors that are furthest behind. But there are other sectors where I think the tools that we'll be able to bring to bear will have a much more near-term effect. And I don't know, David, if you want to speak to any of those, but certainly in the power sector and transportation sector, where we've already made a tremendous amount of progress, we just need to make sure that we're aligning public and private capital to scale these things as quickly as possible.
Yeah, I think the one thing that I would add on to that is that we've got experience in this space. It wasn't quite sufficient, but let's not forget that the Recovery Act in 2009 made what is still to this day the largest investment in clean energy in this nation's history, to the tune of something around $90 billion. And even though what we are talking about today is far, far greater in scale than what happened then, it's important to note that those investments at the time brought the costs of renewable energy down so that they were more or less at parity with traditional energy sources. So once you change the incentives and really pull hard at the levers, and this is consistent with what we've seen, I think, across a number of states throughout this nation's recent history that have adopted a renewable fuel standard, they've found that once they get going and get that positive movement, they are able to meet their targets faster than they ever anticipated that they would be able to. So there is no doubt, just to reiterate the president's vision, that we are moving towards a clean energy economy. The race here is about whether or not America is going to lead the way and lead the rest of the world. And the president has been very clear in that with his leadership, he expects that we will.
Okay, let me get to my old good friend, Peter Leiden. Peter, jump in here.
Hey there. Yeah, coming in from the San Francisco Bay Area here. And I've been doing a lot of work with Autodesk, trying to think through their next 10 years based around climate. And they deal, Autodesk does the software that really, the whole architecture world, the construction world, and the manufacturing world, and a lot of engineers actually work. And as I learn more about their customers, particularly construction, they're so far behind. But basically, they're all driven by government mandates. I've been hearing over and over. It's like, what are they? If they just get forced to do stuff, they'll do stuff. But if they're just going to do on their own, it's such a fractured industry, frankly, with all these little mom and pop shops and stuff. They're not going to do it on their own. So one of the things I was also just thinking is, I'm looking at the next wave, because I also have done the solar and the electric car stuff, but it's the heat pumps. It's the, how do we get rid of natural gas and all the heating and cooking and all that infrastructure is one that people haven't really hit yet. It's starting to hit out here in terms of the Bay Area, of kind of new regulations that are kind of forcing that out of future buildings. But I'm wondering, are you touching on any of that next wave of kind of energy getting off of carbon beyond just the electric car and the basic electricity piece?
Yes, and Jane, you can jump in, but I was remiss, and you reminded me of something that we should have covered already to this point in our comments, but we had not yet. It's neither a part of Jane's portfolio nor, well, I claim no expertise whatsoever. I'm just a sales guy out here on this stuff. But the idea that the government has a powerful lever to pull themselves is not lost upon us. And our colleagues within the White House Council on Environmental Quality include the sustainability team, which is working on changing how government uses its enormous purchasing power and changes that so that we are leading by example, so that the government, as it is determining what its fleet of vehicles looks like in the future, what its buildings look like as we build them going forward, that we are adhering to the best and cleanest standards and are really setting the way. And that'll be important, not just because it'll encourage private industry to develop in a way that meets those government standards, but those will accrue to the benefit of those companies' customer base as well. Something that you might develop in order to win a government contract will inherently make you more competitive in the marketplace as well with respect to its clean energy deployment. So I'll stop talking and let Jane jump in.
This, I will say, I did mention this in my remarks because I think this is a central tool for decarbonizing industry. So I mentioned leveraging federal procurement of clean construction materials. And there's a lot of conversation about this in terms of buy clean. One of the things that is not always well understood is that over a third of the embodied carbon in construction materials in the United States is a result of public projects. And so there's actually a very sizable market that we can leverage, we're already putting tax dollars into these projects to make sure that as we procure these materials, we're doing so in a way that is supporting U.S. jobs and high quality union friendly jobs, and ensuring that we're helping to create markets for clean materials, which at least at early stages are likely to be more expensive. And to David's point, this isn't the first time we've thought about using procurement in this way. We've certainly used procurement to think about how to drive down the cost of technologies in the electric power sector in the past, so federal procurement of clean electrons. And obviously this is a huge part of what the Biden administration has been leaning into. And I think it could be incredibly impactful. So definitely really excited about the work that we're doing there.
Hey, listen, we're hitting time. So I want to say, first of all, this has been great. And there's so much on the table here that these kinds of conversations I think are really, really important. And so I encourage the two of you, as somebody who lives this stuff every day, I still feel like I learned things today from both of you. And so I think these are valuable sessions for people out around the country to help get more connected to the ambition you have, and frankly, the responsibility you're taking for what is a really tough and important challenge that we face that has been, unfortunately, overly political, frankly, for far too long. And so let me just say before we wrap is, let me let you each, if you have closing thoughts or anything you didn't get to cover as we bring it to a close. And David, let me start with you.
Sure. Well, this has been really thought-provoking, but also fun and important. I think we don't shy away from any opportunity to share what we're thinking, what our vision is, or how seriously the president takes the climate crisis and how committed he is to combating the climate crisis. So, Simon, thank you to you and to NDN for giving us a forum, and thank you to all your members for their really thoughtful and engaged set of questions. And we're not taking anything for granted. It's going to be hard to pass the bipartisan infrastructure framework. It's going to be hard to get his Build Back Better agenda passed via reconciliation. But God willing, if we're able to get to that point, we would love to come back and talk to you guys again about what implementation looks like. And between now and then, we hope to enlist as many of your help as we possibly can in rolling up your sleeves and pushing as hard as you can and being vocal partners in sharing this is what the country needs. And we've got no choice but to get it done. So thank you, Simon. Thank you, NDN, for having us.
Thanks, David. Jane.
Yeah, I'll just echo David's remarks. Thank you so much for having us. This has been really fun. It's always exciting to talk to other people who seem almost as excited as David is about the clean energy transition and its job creation potential. So thank you for having us, and looking forward to working together moving forward, and happy to talk more to whomever would like about the importance of industrial decarbonization in particular. So.
Well, listen, thanks to you both. Thanks, everybody. Listen, good luck. I mean, this is such important work. This is such a moment of promise for the country. And thanks for stepping up and leading us on these critical issues. And thanks, everybody, for being here today. If you thought this was valuable, the recording will be up on the site within an hour. Please direct people towards it. We've got many also awesome events coming up. And so stay in touch. And thanks to you both again. Thanks, everybody.